On the Aaron Day Show, tonight at 6:15, the black box that sent an innocent man to prison for 12 and a half years. Defense attorneys Mike Hassard and Tor Ekeland join us 27 days before the D.C. Circuit decides Roman Sterlingov's appeal. 6 a.m., tanks through the front door for a radio host who said the word Bitcoin. Ian Freeman, Roger Ver, Roman Storm, Keon Rodriguez, still locked up. This is 6 a.m. in Keene, and this is what happens when you dare to speak truth about financial freedom in America.
Street, rifles in the hall, tank through the front door for a radio host in Keene. He fed the meters, saved the town, Robin Hood of Keene. 20 years behind the microphone, first voice to say the word Bitcoin. Build a church in New Hampshire, an orphanage in Uganda. Folks call this town a crypto mecca. They call him a criminal. They send him undercover who said he doesn't heroin. Ian said no, turned him away. The Fed bought it anyway and called it evidence. Free and Freeman. Free and Freeman. You can send your tanks at dawn, but the signal doesn't stop. And call it evidence. Send your tanks at dawn, but the signal doesn't stop. The judge threw out the laundering. Not enough evidence. 96 months anyway. The laws written before Bitcoin existed. Keon Rodriguez, Christmas Eve. William Hill, 4 years. Roman Storm, retrial in the fall. Ray Youssef, $200. Sterlingov, 12 years. Roger Ver, 50 million in a gag order. The war on crypto didn't end. It just changed presidents. Mr. President, you set Ross free. You said you'd end the war. Ian's been inside since 23. Bonnie says he teaches inmates how to read. She says Bitcoin is sacred to us. You freed one. Now free them all! What you do with freedom is your
last week on the show how Five Eyes intelligence agencies systematically destroyed a working decentralized securities blockchain called Equibit. Chris Horlacher walked us through the full playbook: a regulatory sabotage, infiltrated developers, even physical attacks, and then the DTCC quietly built the exact same technology for themselves. It's the same pattern we've seen with Liberty Dollar, eGold, Tornado Cash. They crush the competition, then absorb the innovation. If you missed it, watch S3E14 now. I'm running for U.S. Senate in New Hampshire. One demand: pardons for every crypto political prisoner. Ian Freeman, Roger Ver, Roman Sterlingov, Tornado Cash, Samurai Wallet. In 2016, my spoiler run cost Republicans this seat by 1,000 votes. In 2026, that's enough to take it. Not bought, not sold. Pardons, or I take the seat.
Oh, 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 oh. Live free or die, but death's not the worst. It's waking up empty, it's dying of thirst. Trading your days for insurance and pills, while the machine builds your cage and you're paying the bill. Quiet desperation, that's the real grave. A life half lived as a comfortable slave. This ain't what you were born for, you know it's true. You feel it in your chest, breaking through. They're wiring the walls, closing in, tracking your dollars underneath your skin. Left and right, same throne, same crown. No one stands up, no one makes a sound. They hand you a ballot like it means something real. Two wings of one bird, same deal, same steel. We say no, no to the change, no to the dollar running through our veins, no to the white coats, no to the lies. This is the day that we rise. It's hurts right here, it's hurts right now. Your rights are yours, you take them back, not giving out. Not from the left, not from the right. They were always yours, now step into the light. The daylight breaks, a new day comes. We take it back, every last one. Live free or die, we fan the flame. Nothing will ever be the same. Fan the flame. Fan the flame. Fan the flame.
Two weeks ago, we released Ohio Captured, exposing how technocrats seized every level of Ohio's government. Jobs Ohio controls billions with zero transparency, $2.5 billion in data center tax breaks for just 356 jobs. The intelligence line runs from Max Fisher to Wexner, to Epstein, to Thiel, to Vance. And this is the blueprint they're rolling out in all 50 states. Born in Russia, raised in Stockholm, 12 and a half years for a crime with no evidence. This is Roman Sterlingov's anthem, Let Him Fly. Go to freeroman.org.
Born in Russia, raised in Stockholm. Bitcoin made me young and free. I flew to California to learn to fly a plane for me. Landed in Los Angeles with my laptop in my life. Men in dark suits waiting at the gate never made it out that night. Let him fly, let him fly. He came to learn to fly. They locked him in a cage for a tool nobody understood. Let him fly, let him fly, let the pilot fly. They took my diaries, they took my drives, searched every password and folder of my life. Found nothing in the wreckage, no server logs, no keys, just a company's theories and a judge who wouldn't see. 395 million is what they say I owe, but I had 1.8. I guess they didn't know. Let him fly, let him fly. He came to learn to fly. They locked him in a cage for a tool nobody understood. Let him fly, let him fly, let the pilot fly. The defense asked me under oath, am I aware of scientific evidence that this software works? I am unaware. I am unaware. I am unaware of scientific evidence. This software works. I came to fly. I came to fly. Let it fly. Let it fly. Let it fly. Let it fly. Let him fly. Let him fly. Let the pilot touch the sky. 12 and a half years for a crime they couldn't prove. Let him fly. Let him fly. Let Roman fly. Roman Sterlingov, Fort Dix, May 12th, 9:30 in the morning. Let him fly. Oh, let him fly. Let him fly. Let him fly. Let him fly. Let him fly.
Three things coming up. May 21st through 25th, Libertarian National Convention in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Saturday, May 23rd, Enemies of the State, a live event with Ammon Bundy, Afroman, and speakers for crypto prisoners still behind bars. I'm running for U.S. Senate in New Hampshire in day2026.com, using that race to pressure Trump on pardons, same leverage that freed Ross. May 25th, Rage Against the War Machine, also in Grand Rapids. That's the pre-show. The Aaron Day Show starts now. All right. Tonight, a man you've never heard of is sitting in federal prison for the next 12 and a half years, convicted with no server logs, no private keys, no communications, no confession, and not one single witness who says they ever dealt with him. No direct evidence, zero. What they had instead was a piece of software, a black box, built by a private company worth $8.6 billion. No published error rate, no peer review, no independent audit. Its competitor ran the same data and got a 64% discrepancy and called the government's use of it reckless. The prosecutor who won the case now works at that company. The IRS investigators who built the case, their firm got bought by that company 5 months after the arrest. The man in a cell, a dual Russian-Swedish citizen who had never set foot in the United States until federal agents grabbed him at LAX on his way to flight school. His name is Roman Sterlingov, and in 27 days, May 12th at 9:30 a.m., the DC Circuit Court of Appeals decides whether secret, unaudited, privately owned software can send an American or anyone standing on American soil to prison. If Roman loses, you are next, because once a black box can convict one man, it can convict anyone. Tonight, I'm joined by 3 people who have taken this fight all the way to the federal appellate bench. Tor Ekeland, the man who called Chainalysis the Theranos of blockchain forensics, nationally known CFAA defense attorney, one of the first lawyers in America to accept Bitcoin, and his co-counsel, Mike Hazard, the lawyer who picked up the phone, took the case when no one else would, and has been in the trenches ever since, and Jeff Fishbach. Hi, Jeff. I don't have a lot of background on you, so I'm happy to talk about that. They're standing between Roman Sterlingov and a life destroyed by an algorithm. They're standing between you and a justice system where the evidence against you is a trade secret. This is the test case. This is the line. This is the secret software convicting innocent Americans. So Tor, Mike, Jeff, welcome to the Aaron Day Show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well,
Just for the record, Jeff is a forensic investigator we worked with for years. He's a digital forensic investigator, and he was our chief digital forensic expert on the case. And so that's why he's here today.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, certainly a lot to talk about in that regard. Actually, I've talked about Chainalysis quite a bit in different contexts, not related to these legal proceedings, but more to talk about the extent to which Chainalysis is being used to track people's transactions. And I had last year 3 separate people come to me, either with a business dispute or in a divorce. And I learned that you can now, as a private investigator, get a license in Chainalysis. And people are using this software in these court cases. And based on kind of now what I understand from this case, this may actually be junk data, but it's actually proliferating. So Chainalysis is becoming this kind of standard part of legal proceedings, not just criminal proceedings, but civil proceedings.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that was problematic for us with Roman's case. So they used Chainalysis in Roman's case the investigators use it to make an attribution of him as the operator of Bitcoin Fog, even though there's no direct evidence of him ever operating it. And for those of you who don't know, Bitcoin Fog was a Bitcoin mixer that would basically sort of mix up your Bitcoin address. So it was untraceable, because if you do a transaction on the blockchain, you can follow the transaction. Your name's not on the blockchain, right? There's no personal identifying information on the blockchain, but the transaction's there and you can follow it. And so if you take out your Bitcoin through an exchange like Coinbase or whatever and flip it to US dollars, usually your name gets attached to the transaction. And so they use it to trace it there. But so what they said, they used Chainalysis mainly for in this case is to say, well, Bitcoin Fog laundered $400 million worth of drug money through things like Silk Road. And when we do all these traces with it, we find Roman's name like 14 addresses down the line and the only name there. And that's actually the main reason we think he's in jail right now, is just because he was the only one back in 2011, 2012 in Sweden putting his name on, his Mt. Gox account kind of thing. Like, he's in jail because he was a Boy Scout and he followed the rules.
Yeah, by the way, not that he was the only one involved in any of the transactions. Just he was. And matter of fact, I think Tor asked the question under cross whether they had bothered to look for anyone else, and I believe the answer was he's the only one that we could identify.
It seems like there was some parallel construction in this case as well.
Yeah. So to take a step back, so who is Roman Sterlingov? What's his background and, how did he get involved in all of this?
So Roman's a really good guy, and I think that's what we got to get off first. He was born in Theranos, Russia, which is in the middle of Russia. It's deep into Russia. And when I think he was about 14 years old, his family, with his mother, left his father behind in Russia and moved to Sweden. So he was a new immigrant to Sweden. He didn't know any Swedish. He barely knew English. And he tried to find his way in high school. While he's doing that, he kind of found a little bit of home in the computer world. He was a little bit introverted at the time. He's been working on himself ever since. But he really got into computers at around that time as an introvert in a new country. And Bitcoin provided him a community. And he really talks about that often, about how the first time he bought Bitcoin back in 2011, when it was around 30 cents, he met a guy at a bar and they opened up their laptops, and he really enjoyed that camaraderie of hanging out with fellow nerds. And, ever since then, he began to go around to these meetups in Scandinavia and the Baltics. And he had accumulated this Bitcoin in 2011. I think if I remember correctly, he bought 2,000 euros worth from this guy when it was worth 30 cents. By 2013, 2014, that amount, the value of it had skyrocketed. The way he described it to us was it was like a wallet. You could spend as much money you wanted out of it, and it would never go down. It would just keep going up. It would keep going up. And so he would go to these conferences, and he became one of the people at the conferences where if you wanted to buy Bitcoin, mind you, there were no exchanges at the time. You would go find Roman Sterlingov and give him cash, and he'd help you set up your wallet and give you some Bitcoin. At one of these conferences, somebody told him that, hey, with the amount of Bitcoin you have in your wallet, you're a target for a wrench attack. And that's when he first learned what a wrench attack was. Around this time, people had started to realize that when you do a transaction, there's 5 pieces of information that go on the blockchain: the sender's address, the recipient's address, the amount of Bitcoin that's being transacted, the transaction ID, and the date and time. So by having the recipient's address and the transaction ID, you're able to look up the sender's address. And then when you type that into a block explorer, you can see how much Bitcoin is in that account. And if you have a large amount of Bitcoin, you become a target, especially at this time, and especially in the areas where he was, which was the Baltics and Scandinavia. So at that time, somebody had also told him that, hey, there's ways to obfuscate your transactions, and one of these ways is Bitcoin fog. So he starts to use Bitcoin fog as part of his personal privacy measures. When he's transacting with these people he doesn't know at these conferences, he's using Bitcoin fog to send the money through so as not to expose his own Bitcoin address that held the majority of his funds. When 2014, 2015 come around, we start to see the growth of exchanges where you can transfer funds into US dollars or euros and spend them. So he created a Kraken account. And that was a big piece of the government's evidence during trial. He took a large portion of what he had accumulated early on, transacted it through Bitcoin fog, and put it into his Kraken account. And the government argues in their prosecution that those funds going into Kraken from Bitcoin fog were the Bitcoin fog service fees. They were not. The pattern does not look like it. It's very consistent with somebody who had a large pile of early Bitcoin. But that was a key piece of the government's evidence. They had this entire case, and we're going to get into the Chainalysis stuff as well. But in 2021, his life is kind of, he doesn't know what he's going to do. He's just been spending this Bitcoin. He doesn't have a career, so he decides that he wants to become an airline pilot. He registers for a pilot training course in California, and he flies into LAX, and that's where they arrested him. After he was arrested, he reached out to a cousin of his. And his cousin happened to be really good friends with my best friend, who's since passed away. Rest in peace, Sam. Sam gives me a call and says, "Hey, can you figure out what's going on here? My buddy's cousin just got picked up in LA." And that was the beginning of our journey on the case and how we got involved with it.
Mike, it probably should be at least clarified, since the government made such a big deal about the flight lessons, that he testified to this, that one of the things he was worried about was that he referred to this as his magic wallet. Like, he couldn't spend enough, it just kept filling itself back up. But what his real concern was he had also seen it take deep dives and was worried about a crash. And he thought he really needed to take some of what he had and get himself a career. And being a pilot was something he thought would be a fun career.
And part of
one
the
of the
government.
things-
Go ahead.
I just think what's really concerning about this case, and why everybody should be concerned, because you could be Roman Sterlingov sitting in a jail cell right now. Anybody who's done a transaction is. So when they arrest him in April of 2021 at LAX, they basically arrest him for running Bitcoin Fog, the mixer, for 10 years and money laundering $400 million worth of drug money that they say went through like Silk Road and Alphabet and all this stuff like that, right? They arrest him. He's got 3 laptops, 3 terabytes in storage devices, thumb drives, handwritten notes, a spreadsheet with all of his passwords, all sorts of stuff. He doesn't know he's going to be arrested. He's not thinking he's going to get arrested for running Bitcoin Fog. Not a single piece of evidence anywhere on any of his devices of him ever operating Bitcoin Fog. Not a single piece of evidence in the record anywhere directly showing him operating Bitcoin Fog. The unique thing about this case, I've never had a case like this, right, is every single piece of evidence you have to speculate from to get him as the operator of Bitcoin Fog. I have never had a case like that. I've never had, in my 12, 15 years of representing, A-list hackers, I've never had one get caught. And Jeff and I have talked about this too, because I don't think he's ever had this happen in any of his 20, 30 years doing this, get caught that they didn't leave a freaking trace somewhere in their devices. And that's just not here. They're basing everything on these speculative traces between addresses that they don't have the private keys for. And, as most people probably know, you need the private key definitively tells you who controls the blockchain address. No private keys, like nothing. It's maddening, this case, that way.
So I think this is an important part. I just want to make sure that's clear for everyone, which is that, at this point, I'm not sure Bitcoin Fog, even according to current government policy, is even an illegal thing. I think oftentimes we talk about Roman Storm and others and the idea of a mixing service, is that even illegal? That's not even what's at question here, or it is to a certain degree. But in this particular instance, Roman Sterlingov didn't even create the service that shouldn't even be illegal to begin with. So, we're talking about, this is a whole new level here of they've got the wrong guy. On the one hand, the thing that he did isn't illegal anyway. And the methods that they used to prosecute the case, if the precedent stands, it basically opens anyone up to the interpretation of how this Chainalysis software works, which as we'll get into, is really, really, really shaky. So
actually, sorry, but the evidence that they have that he ran Bitcoin Fog is that he had a server, which they seized and found nothing. But that then was evidence that he hid it.
And this case is really important because this is the case that Chainalysis was built on. Through the course of from 2014, when they started investigating this case, all the way up to when he was arrested, Chainalysis was involved the entire way. And they were not told, hey, can you guys try to figure out who runs Bitcoin Fog? They were told, hey, can you prove that Roman Sterlingov operated Bitcoin Fog?
And what's disturbing, I think, my biggest problem with this whole area of blockchain forensics is it's completely unregulated. There's no standards, right? And it looks like a lot of, like, at least in criminal law, when junk science comes in, like something like 51% of the wrongful convictions that the Innocent Project gets overturned comes from junk science. And it happens just like this. These people see this area to go rushing in and make money with this forensic stuff. It happened with bite marks, DNA, fingerprinting, all this stuff before there's any standards. And the juries buy this stuff because it's really impressive. It seems really scientific and whatnot. But when we asked, Chainalysis expert on the stand, on cross-examination, can you name us your software's error rates? No. Have you done any internal error rate analysis? No. Can you tell me its rate of false positives? No. Can you tell me its rate of false negatives? No. Can you name me one scientific peer-reviewed paper attesting to the accuracy of your software? The answer was no. Right? Like, so in our this is one of our big arguments on appeal. This doesn't belong in a federal court. And they tried to hide, like, we wanted to see their source code. We wanted to see the full set of heuristics, which is just sort of the guessing algorithm they set up to cluster their data. And they fought us every step of the way, as if somehow they were surprised that they would be challenged in a federal court. Yet they willingly chose to go into the law enforcement market, but they seem to have gone into this market and all they thought about was making money. And they didn't at any point consider, oh, well, is this stuff accurate? Because if they were concerned about getting the right people and innocence, they would have the accuracy of their software. But the fact that they ended up in a federal court and they answered all those questions and I asked them about the scientific basis for their software in the negative tells you what they were really thinking, when they went into this market. But everybody buys into it. Like you said, they didn't hire the winning prosecutor in the case. They hired one of the prosecutors who worked on this case. Their expert that came in and testified in this case was from DEA. They've hired people from the FBI. They spend a lot of money, and they did buy a company, but like you said, by one of the IRS criminal investigators. This guy starts a company. He uses it to investigate Roman. It gets top billing in the DOJ press release when Roman is arrested. Mind you, the government prosecutor's been talking to the press in a way they shouldn't have been for years before this. So as soon as Roman is arrested, Wired runs a piece, and there's this great DOJ press release. And here's this great company that did so much work on this case, right? So 5 months later, Chainalysis buys the company, and we don't see any evidence from that company in any of the discovery in the case, or it doesn't even come up in the case, right? Like, to me, this is a case where profits got put before justice.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say their argument, but just expanding on what Tor's talking about, their argument, which also included not even letting us see how they trained officers, what materials they used, any of that stuff. Their argument was effectively, well, if they shared any of this with us, people would be able to get away with it. When I think any of us here, probably anybody watching this, knows that there's nothing to get away with. It's all public data. So there's no way that you can change your behavior. You wouldn't be able to use Bitcoin at all if you wanted to, quote unquote, get away with it. So they just didn't want it. They didn't want us to see how uncertain their results were. I'll be the most generous of everybody here. I won't say that it's useless data. It's not conclusive data, not the way they presented it.
Well, one thing, is I've had a number of different people on here. A lot of people are not familiar with the court system at all. If you've never actually dealt with it, and specifically if you've never dealt with a criminal case where you're on the opposite side of the federal government, you may still have some notion that the way that the system works is the way that you learned about it in civics class or history class.
Right.
Or TV.
Or TV. And so what I found is, in each individual case, it seems so outlandish that people have a hard time believing it, or they get into this mode where, well, this must be one isolated case. However, we have enough isolated cases where we are seeing a number of patterns emerge. And I kind of wanted to run some of these by you, but I may even, at some point get a panel together to discuss the fact that this is kind of standard operating procedure. But first of all, you might think that the goal should be justice and finding the truth. But what we find is that the prosecutors are interested in building up a record and having wins, that it's less about the truth. And then oftentimes what happens is a prosecutor will build up a resume, and then what they do is they leave the government sector, and then they work on the defense side, and they make huge amounts of money based on their track record prosecuting people. So the idea is, hey, we know how the system works, and so we can protect you from the other side. And that, I saw this in the Ian Freeman case, which really kind of radicalized me, which is that they were omitting evidence. They were clearly trying to even manipulate the information that they were presenting. So a lot of people don't realize how stacked the deck is. And so when you go into these trials, the jury knows almost nothing about this. You're very unlikely to find a juror that knows anything about crypto. That may be changing now, but certainly for a case like Roman's and these earlier cases, you're at a disadvantage. And frankly, the way that I've described it is the prosecution often baffles the jury with bullshit because the jury is non-technical and can't understand it. So it looks like, oh, hey, they've got this, here's somebody from the FBI, here are all these people in suits, and they presented all of this stuff and they don't even know how to interpret it or understand it. But a lot of that presentation is actually fake. It's fake information that's being presented. The information on the paper itself doesn't even say what they say it means while they're presenting it to the jury. Am I off base here?
Well, you're
No,
hitting
I
on the
think-
CSI effect. You know,
No.
they have shows like CSI and Law and Order where the government is always getting the bad guy at the end of the show, and people are trained to believe what the government's saying. And if the government's saying something, they usually think it's even worse than what the government was saying because of those shows and because of that attitude.
Well,
And I think
also-
the government
Oh,
comes
sorry,
in
go
with a
ahead,
little bit of, I think the government comes in with a little bit of advantage of sort of the psychology of that they're the protector. And, like you say, everyone's grown up seeing on TV and they've learned that a lot of people, unless you grew up in the hood or, you're a person of color in the United States, maybe, you've grown up with this notion of law enforcement as a protector and the savior. And so they get a lot of deference in a courtroom that, over my 15 years now, I've kind of come to see is slanted towards the government in all these small ways that aren't anywhere in the record. I'll give one example and I'll move on. When I was just starting out in federal court and we're doing these hacker cases all over the country, I asked my mentor, how do I know where to sit in the courtroom? And he just looked at me and he said, well, the prosecution's table is always closest to the jury. And I was like, huh. And if you read, just basic psychology text, you'll see that whoever's closer gets primacy and authority with the people that they're talking to. I've been in a couple courtrooms in the United States where the prosecutors weren't. Their table wasn't right in front of the jury, but that wasn't Roman's trial. And that's not most of them. And the conviction rate in federal criminal trials is between 90 and 99%, depending on the year you look at it. And that is not a fair system. And that's not a fair system. When we're in it, I respect the institution, but there's so many ingrained institutional prejudices and a prosecutorial bias. Like 40% of the federal bench is former DOJ prosecutors. You're not, it's not a rational and fair system.
It baffled me early on in the case during a pretrial conference that one of the prosecutors said that it was up to us to prove that Roman was innocent. And we were like, talking about
what?
You
Right.
guys have the burden to do
But
that.
he was right. He was telling the truth. Like he was speaking the actual truth of the system as opposed to what you've been taught, which is that you're innocent, until proven guilty. But actually the reality is you are guilty and you're probably not going to be able to prove yourself innocent if you are innocent.
Well,
That's
innocent
the
until proven
fucking system.
guilty. Innocent until proven guilty really depends in the United States on who you are. There are some
Yeah,
people
that's
that,
true,
that
too.
get that presumption. But
It's also
but
written nowhere
most
in the
people-
Constitution.
Right. Yeah. Also notice if you go up to any courthouse and you find scales of justice, take a good look at them. They're never completely balanced. They're always weighed down on one side.
Fair point.
So I want to talk a bit about Chainalysis just to give people some backstory. I don't know if you guys, I've talked about in previous episodes the history of Chainalysis, but I think it's really important that people understand who Chainalysis is, the history of Chainalysis, and then the importance they played in this particular case. Does anyone want to comment on kind of the background of Chainalysis?
Yeah, of course. The Chainalysis was founded by Michael Groninger. He came over from Kraken. And I think he used a lot of the government contracts, and he had learned about the AML requirements that he was going through while setting up Kraken, and that's what he built Chainalysis to do in the marketplace.
So this is like 2014, right?
Yeah.
Right. And you can, they come in on Roman's case around 2014, 2015. And I think they start working with Treasury, IRS. And then this case is one of those cases that they use to sort of leapfrog over to get contracts with DOJ. and you see them start. I think this may have been like one of I don't know like for sure, but I think this may have been one of Chainhouse's first cases really that they're working on the government with, and it just kind of lingers on, and it goes on for years and years and years. And I think like one of the things that happened with Roman's arrest is that they really rolled the dice thinking that when they arrest him they would get all the corroborating evidence, and they just didn't. And there was this, on the side note, there's this, because I've just been thinking about this a lot going into the appeal. You know, after they arrested Roman, you know, they were cooperating with the Swedish police, and they could have gone and searched Roman's apartment in Sweden and gotten his laptop and his computers and everything from the apartment. They never did that. It was like after they arrested him, they were like, "Oh shit, we don't want to look any further because we don't want to find out." Right?
But
like,
to the jury, though, they did present the fact that he had like bunker Tor tunnels from his remote computers to his home servers, and because they didn't go and search his home in Sweden, because they didn't physically have those servers, probably because they knew there was going to be nothing on it.
Well, he didn't have servers in his house, but. He didn't have servers in his house.
His home
his
home
plant
network,
watering system.
his home network.
He had his plant watering system. The guy's a computer nerd, right? Like as far as I can tell, his crime is that he got into Bitcoin in 2010, right? Yeah. And the best we can figure the reason he's in this mess is because he did some peer-to-peer transactions with somebody who started Bitcoin Fog, right? But like you know, they're giving him. Basically, he's accruing what they call in our business downstream liability, and it's sort of like blaming the bank, like for the guy who withdraws cash out of the ATM. Then that cash goes through like 12 different people, and that 12th person commits a crime. Like essentially, the reason Roman's in jail is they're saying, okay, we're holding you responsible for what that 12th person downstream used. Another striking thing about this case and these Bitcoin prosecutions in general is they would never do this to a bank. They would never, ever hold a bank liable under the criminal theories that they're using against people engaged in cryptocurrency transactions. And I don't see what the difference is. When you just look at it legally, it's if you're considering it all money, you can't let the banks off, right? But they would never do that, right? So there's this element of it, and DOJ has this as an issue, I think generally, is they're defending an old financial order that's very ingrained in them. And I don't even think they're aware that they're doing it. I think it's, you know, part of that is just sort of like an institutional reflex, and that's what I think the big battle is between the left and the right now, to speak in crude terms, is whether or not there, you know, this revolution in finance, which is it's happened. You're not going to get it to go away, but are they just going to criminalize it?
But someone like Roman will always be the target, especially compared to a bank, because you can't seize all of a bank's money, but they were able to seize all of Roman's money. That was easy. And ultimately, if you follow these, or at least my cases, following my cases, nobody gets arrested unless there is some evidence. Nobody gets prosecuted, not like this, unless there's some evidence that there's enough money to justify that prosecution. Mm-hmm. And had it was pretty obvious. And remember, you guys were talking a little bit more about Roman personally before. I didn't want to meet Roman. I didn't meet him until trial, and the reason was because both Tor and Mike told me right off the bat, "Oh, you're gonna love him. He's innocent. You're gonna love him. He's a great guy. Just wait till you meet him." And I said, "Well, then I can't meet him, because if I'm gonna like him that much, I need to be able to, to remain dispassionate and be able to find something wrong." Probably I spent a year on the case before I met Roman, something like that. And then when I finally met him, one of the first questions he said to me was, actually, it wasn't a question, it was a statement. He said, "Well, I must have done something wrong to deserve this." And by that point, I just met him at that point. I said, "The only thing I can see that you did wrong to deserve this was you got into Bitcoin too early."
Yeah. I mean, it is tragic, right? Looking into that. Well, actually, and from what I've seen with this, it's not even, obviously Jamie Dimon has not gone to prison, or no one's charging him for Epstein. Yeah. But in this case, Roman's not even the bank. This is like charging someone for using the same ATM that someone else used that was involved in bad activity. Like, this is like just so far removed from from any possible crime or liability, that it's nonsensical. So as I was going through and looking at all of this, and I've watched a lot of your other talks, obviously, and I saw Mike recently at an event we were at together. So what potentially might be some of the motivation here? So let's go into some of the details on what they were trying to present with respect to Chainalysis, because I found some of your presentation on that to be jaw-dropping.
Yeah, so the government's key piece of evidence from Chainalysis was they were trying to trace back the money that was used to register the domain registration for the ClearNet website, www.bitcoinfog.com. Now, this
in
ClearNet
2011
was on the open internet, and it wasn't the actual Bitcoin Fog service. It didn't exist there. The Bitcoin Fog service operated on the Tor network, but bitcoinfog.com had a link that would direct you to the Tor network to be able to use the service. And so the government was trying to trace back the registration of that website and trace the funds to figure out where they came from. And in order to do so, they put up this big, poster. The government loves to put up these posters for the jury to look at during trial. And you had the transaction for the DNS registration way down here on the bottom right. And then 16 convoluted hops with no private keys. And then you have Roman's KYC tracking accounts. And in between those two known addresses were all these different wallet addresses that were linked to different emails. None of those emails appeared anywhere in Roman's possession. None of the passwords or logins appeared anywhere in his devices or networks. Yet they brought this out. So it very much is like if you're Roman at the top here, you do a transaction right away. You had two blockchain addresses, Bitcoin addresses that had no attributed owner, right? So they could have been anybody, but the government tried to argue that those belonged to Roman and he hid them and all this stuff. But what happened to Roman is something similar to if you have a $10 bill, you go to buy some coffee. Then the barista takes that $10 bill and goes and gives it to the neighbor. And the neighbor takes the $10 bill and goes buys a pair of shoes. And then the shoe store guy goes and buys drugs with it. And now the government's coming to say, hey, Roman funded the purchase of these drugs. It's illegal activity. The downstream liability aspect of how the government is prosecuting Roman Sterlingov is scary for anybody involved in Bitcoin, because it doesn't matter who you transact with. If the government can use Chainalysis to make up these attributions and be able to present it with authority in front of a jury, it endangers everybody in the Bitcoin world.
Well, in fact, they told us, they said, if he can just tell us who he transacted with, give us another name. How's he going to figure out who he transacted with?
And that's like one of the like tougher things about this case as far as it's like, how can we cut a deal with the government when our guy didn't do it? Right? Like when your guy's done it or they got him on something or whatever, you go cut a deal, right? Because you can give information, you can leverage that into a deal. And unfortunately, like 90% of criminal cases get disposed of in a plea deal. Really fucked up plea system, but that's another But here in a situation where you've got somebody who's innocent and the government's coming to you and saying, well, just give us all the information and, we'll let this off. We'll let this go. It's like, dude, we don't have anything to give you. Our client would have to lie, right? And like, what are we going to do here, right? Like, and they wanted, what did they want at the beginning? They wanted 25 years for him.
That was the plea offer. The plea offer was 25.
That was the plea offer? 25 years.
Then the U.S. sentencing guidelines, which are themselves a whole story and a whole complete mess, they had a recommendation of life in prison. Life in prison for the USSG. After trial, the government was requesting 30 years in prison. We ended up getting 150 months to 12 and a half years.
And kept his right to appeal.
But we kept his right to appeal, yeah. And he didn't have to lie.
They don't have to lie.
But at least by trial, the DOJ made it pretty clear that if he wanted to give up more Bitcoin, if he wanted us to give wallet addresses, if he wanted to give access to the proceeds of Bitcoin Fog, deals could be discussed. But he didn't have any of that.
Bitcoin Fog still has a hot wallet sitting there with all the Bitcoin that generated the fees. It never went out to anyone, let alone Roman.
That reminds me of one of my favorite facts in this case. In the indictment, there's that address with they're saying, what did they call it? The Bitcoin Fog address. I forget what they called it, consolidation address. So they say there's, I don't know how many, like millions, worth of Bitcoin in it. I can't remember now, but I remember we go look at it. So let's look up the wallet address, right? There's $0 in it, and it hasn't transacted since like 2013 or whatever. And they're like, oh yeah, but we've got this secret sauce and Chainalysis, and we know that actually there's all this money in it, and that's part of that $400 million asset forfeiture to him. And we're like, well, we can't even look it up. And it's like, but there's this. So in my computer cases coming into this, there was always this. People have this weird superstition. They almost look at like hackers and stuff like that as witches, because I think they just don't understand the computer science, and it kind of triggers this primordial fear of the unknown in people. You get that with Bitcoin too, right? And it's another thing you're fighting in the juries in these criminal cases, not fighting with them, trying to overcome with them, is this guy looks like evil, and they just did everything they could to make Roman look evil, which is just ridiculous because the guy is not evil. I mean, this is an innocent guy sitting in jail right now that they just destroyed. They haven't destroyed because he's not broken, but they're trying to destroy.
Well, I mean, it seems like if your name's Roman and you're from Russia, then you're automatically, it's like, we get him. Like, he's the guy that we want to go after.
But you're not, I mean, you're not far off, because they repeatedly mentioned that he was from Russia. They repeatedly mentioned that he wanted to fly a plane. They couldn't decide whether he was part of Taliban or
right.
It was bizarre. Well, and then they threw out accusations that he was a pedophile, and there was absolutely nothing in the case that even came close to that.
They kept on putting up this image of a bad ID photo he had. He had a big scraggly beard, a computer scientist guy beard, big one, and it was on his Swedish driver's license, and they just kept putting in that picture in front of the jury over and over and over again, and emphasizing the fact that he was Russian.
Not a single eyewitness testifies that they saw Roman operating Bitcoin Fog, that he heard him talking about it, right? All the government witnesses were after the fact investigators, people who'd done tracing on, Chainalysis Reactor, or a forensic accountant, saying, well, my guess is this is what he would have gotten, because they said that the money that he mixed through Bitcoin Fog, his own money he got because he started trading in Bitcoin in 2010. They said after he mixed it through Bitcoin Fog and put it in his KYC'd Kraken account, KYC just means he stuck his name on it, right? That those were the royalty payments for Bitcoin Fog, but he should have had way more money. And please explain to me why the supposed founder of Bitcoin Fog, after setting up the sophisticated mixing thing and being all this great and all this stealth, would send his royalty fees from the mixer to a KYC Kraken account. Why would so much of this shit in this case, when you turn around and you really, really look at it, it makes no sense. And it's why it's so maddening that they got the conviction on this, and that they're probably going to, maybe get affirmed on appeal, because I think who knows what the appellate judges think about crypto.
Yeah. I mean, it's confusing for everyone. And it hasn't been great so far, and I know the other cases that I've been following. So we have somebody where they didn't find any actual evidence on any of his own computers, but yet he's going to have this KYC account.
Matter of fact, in fact, he did them an inadvertent favor. He flew over because he didn't know whether he was going to stay or go back, or he was sort of a digital nomad at that time. He flew over with a suitcase filled with devices, with storage, with memory, they did complete forensics on everything, and they couldn't even find a login related to Bitcoin Fog. Nothing.
Wow. So Mike, you'd mentioned that wasn't there somebody else on your side working on the forensics at one point?
Yeah, this was a fascinating story. So in 2021, Tor and I went down to speak at the Bitcoin conference when it was in Miami, and we took the whole presentation. This is before the trial, so we're telling everybody, we got this innocent guy, we need the support. After our presentation, this guy comes up to me in the hallway at the conference center, and he says, hey, this is really messed up what's happening to Roman. This is my Alamo. I want to help you guys out. And he worked for a company called CipherTrace. CipherTrace was an early competitor with Chainalysis. They also did blockchain tracing. They had different heuristics, different methods. And when I spoke to everybody from CipherTrace, everyone said the same thing. This is an art, not a science. You cannot make an attribution 100% using the kind of heuristics that exist in this industry. But we do want to help you. We do want to combat Chainalysis, and we want to help you get this innocent guy out of prison. So we ended up working with one of their top blockchain tracers. We went to work at her house for a week, and we went through everything, all the information. She was lined up to be our expert witness at trial. We had been prepping the entire trial to have CipherTrace be our expert witness that combats Chainalysis attributions. About a week before trial, MasterCard, which owns CipherTrace, pulled their support. Everybody on their side lawyered up, and we weren't able to introduce them as an expert witness at trial in front of the jury.
We couldn't even talk to Jonah.
Couldn't even talk to them. Couldn't talk
It was
to
like
them.
somebody had made a phone call or something. I don't know, like, wow.
And
you know?
right away, right then and there, MasterCard completely dissolves the entire company. It doesn't exist anymore. And we haven't heard or spoken to anybody from CipherTrace since. And those people were dedicated for the cause. They were all trying to help prove Roman's innocence. And that's how it goes sometimes. We don't know what happened there. Chainalysis had a lawyer come in from California to represent them in the case. They tried to put everybody under this very, very strict protective non-competition order. So we had to
non-compete clause to look at the discovery in a federal criminal case, which has never happened in the history of the federal courts. And for those of you who don't know what a protective order is, it's just an order from the court that you're not going to share the evidence in the case that's going between the government and you. You know, you're going to keep it secret until it comes out of court. Fine. We sign them all the time, right? But what was crazy about this one, when we were pushing and pushing and pushing to see everything about Chainalysis Reactor, right? Because we want to know how you're coming up with these numbers and blah, 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 blah. They wanted us, in order to see this stuff, to everybody, our experts, everybody, to sign a non-competition clause for 5 years with Chainalysis Reactor, such that the Chainalysis, if they determined later after the case that somehow we were using the information that they disclosed to us in this case, they could sue us on business matters, right? To which everybody said, no fucking way. Right. And it scared away all our experts because nobody wants to get sued by a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Right. And we asked the court, we said, Your Honor, first of all, this is a criminal case. Somebody's liberty is at stake, and you're putting, proprietary corporate interests above somebody's constitutional liberty. It's just big problem right there. Right. But number two, can you name me one time in the history, I'm talking the entire history of federal criminal jurisprudence, cases, courts, anytime, just show me one time that there has ever been a non-compete clause in a protective order. Guess what they showed me? Absolutely nothing. I was shown one case from an intermediate New Jersey appellate court on a DNA matter, right? So, like, one of the things here that's like a really, really deep constitutional issue is, why are the courts, or at least in this instance, favoring corporate interests and profit over a defendant's liberty interests and their Sixth Amendment right to confront an accuser? And in this case, Chainalysis Reactor, and Chainalysis is an accuser. They're saying you laundered all this money, right? And yet their excuse, like we were saying earlier before, is like, oh, well, hey, you terrorists might be able to use it in the future. Well, tough shit. You know what? Guess what trumps that? The defendant's, Sixth Amendment rights, right? And you know what? You can use open source. There's zero reason for this to be closed source. The only reason is that they're worried about competition, but they should not have stepped into the law enforcement compliance zone marketplace without validating their software and expecting it to be examined. Because right now we're just taking its accuracy on faith and people that they have paid to say that it's accurate.
Actually, Aaron, you'll find this fascinating on what Tor's talking about. So I have been doing this just shy of 30 years now. And for most of at least the first 20 years, there was barely a fight to be able to examine software or hardware in the technology sphere. Basically, I literally have down by my legs, ironically, by my legs, I have some ankle bracelets that literally were sent to us so we could test the GPS systems, how well do they work. it's never ever been a problem. Maybe occasionally we'll have a fight, but I've always been able to examine hardware and software that was used in a case. Over the last little less than 10 years, something has turned around. Something's really changed. All of a sudden, the corporate interests of software have definitely taken over. And now all of a sudden, instead of a court ordering that they have to give us a copy or they can't use it in court, now we're being told, if we give it to you, you're going to use it to help people circumvent somehow. And in fact, I testified in federal court in Alaska. I said, I don't know if the prosecution understands my business model, but I don't make any money by helping people get away with anything. There's no incentive for me. But despite having received national security clearance in prior cases, this case I could get nothing.
And it got worse than just the money, because at one point there was even a criminal clause in their protective order that was coming through. And when Chainalysis or when CipherTrace was withdrawn by their overlords at MasterCard, we tried to get another tracing expert to hop in. And the community had been great. We had been really public about what was going on with Roman's case. And we had 2 potential expert witnesses that were ultimately rejected by the government for the most ridiculous reasons. The first, we tried to bring in Laurent Salat from OXT, which is an open source blockchain tracing firm. The way blockchain tracing firms should be. It should be audited. It should be open source. People should be able to look at the code. And he was going to come in and contest Chainalysis' attributions. Because of the criminal clause in the protective order, and because of the fact that Laurent Salat was French, and France does not extradite its own citizens, the judge was worried that if he comes in and then gets to look at the Chainalysis source code, and then goes back to France, there would be no recourse for the American government to put him in jail. So he cannot be an expert witness, and he cannot testify in this case. The second person who he brought in was, or tried to bring in, was Brian Bishop, who is one of the most elite Bitcoin core developers. Has been part of the Bitcoin project for over a decade. And the prosecution brought all this evidence in to say, oh, this guy's unacceptable as an expert witness because he's into bioengineering. You know, he's into working with genetics and trying to play around with the fundamental building blocks of life. Somehow makes him a bad blockchain analysis. It didn't make any sense, but we ended up having to go to trial without any expert witness on that front.
Well, as a matter of fact, we won't know how it would have gone the other way, but it seemed pretty clear that the only reason I was even able to testify was because right up front during a hearing, I volunteered that I wasn't there for the purposes of Bitcoin tracing, of crypto tracing. That then all of a sudden I was okay.
Oh, and can I say my favorite part of the proceedings that I'm still in shock about? It's so when we go, you do something called a Daubert challenge when you want to challenge this kind of, Chainalysis, this expert kind of testimony. So we mount a Daubert challenge, expert challenge, and we have 2 days of hearings. And mind you, at this point that we're having these 2 days of hearings, Roman has been in jail now for 1.5 years pre-trial. And you can't jail a defendant in the United States pre-trial unless you find, their flight risk and you weigh the evidence against them, right? So we're on, I think it's like day 2 of this hearing. The entire case turns on blockchain and everything. We're 1.5 years in, and the judge just goes, I'm sorry, I just have a question. Does the blockchain have an administrator? Exactly. So, Aaron, you're laughing right now. I can tell whether or not somebody knows something about the blockchain simply by telling that story, because everybody who knows something about the blockchain immediately laughs. And it's fine if you're a beginner and you're still learning this stuff. That's a great beginner question. The answer to which is no, Virginia, the blockchain does not have an administrator because it's a decentralized ledger, and that's why it's one of the greatest innovations in finance in the last few thousand years, right? But for a federal judge to ask that in a hearing 1.5 years after he's jailed somebody, and one of the factors he evaluated was the weight of the evidence, is very problematic, and it's also indicative of sort of like the lack of knowledge base in the courts. And it's also probably you're going to find it in the juries and the general public about this subject area, right? Like, wow, right? And that guy, after that hearings, He's the one who says, oh, it's okay to let Chainalysis Reactor into the courtroom and put it in front of the jury. Somebody who just blatantly told you, I don't really know even the basics about blockchain, but I'm making the decision to let this forensic software in as evidence anyhow, because law enforcement says it works.
Yeah, this is common that I've heard in other cases as well, where the judge doesn't even know how to handle a question or handle the information, and there's often just deference to law enforcement, and we're seeing that over and over again. So to get this straight, so the government is presenting this black box evidence that hasn't been peer reviewed, that hasn't been validated, and then you are trying to mount a defense, and you have a company that is, that MasterCard has an investment in, that is fully understands what's going on here, and they get pulled at the last minute, and so the jury just basically is seeing a one-sided argument that has no backing behind it. Is that basically it?
Yeah, and it was like a week before trial. We'd gotten all these extensions on the trial date. We weren't going to get another trial extension realistically. So like it was, we just had to go, and we had to go without an expert to challenge all their stuff. And we don't know what happened, but it's like one of those things that looks like somebody made a phone call or said, listen, man, if you want our government contracts, maybe you should think twice about what you're doing here or whatever. It's like, it's probably that same like debanking vein kind of stuff. Like this is crazy, like almost like, I don't know what the word is, existential metaphysical battle going on between these forces that think that, Bitcoin and crypto is somehow some evil, malevolent force. Like, Paul Krugman is like lost his mind over it, or like the old guard, and people who are like us are like, this is no big deal. And actually, well, it is a big deal in that it's a huge revolution in finance. And, I think eventually crypto's going to win. But right now, unfortunately, in Bitcoin, whatever, but unfortunately right now we're on the first wave of its adoption, and they're going to be trying to throw more people in jail.
But the government does have, they do have an incentive to fight it. It's hard to tax, it's hard to control. It's certainly not their preferred model of currency.
But financial privacy is the key to capitalism. When I talk to people who are starting to learn about Bitcoin, I had a good conversation with some businessmen in Hong Kong about this at the Bitcoin Asia event. And they said, well, why was Bitcoin fog so important? Or why did the government want to go after it so badly? And I try to explain how, Roman was, availing himself to wrench a tax through not having a financial private system here. But what disturbed him the most was when I said, if you transact with somebody and put a down payment on a business deal, and they can see your address, they can look up to see how much money you have in there, and they can raise the price. You're not going to be getting the best prices in an open financial world and on an open blockchain where you don't have any element of financial privacy. That is going to destroy capitalism. And when he understood that, his eyes lit up, and he's like, man, I get that. I get it. That's why it's terrible. So that seems to be one of the strongest arguments for why financial privacy measures are important, particularly on the blockchain.
In this case, we couldn't talk about it in front of the jury, but as a part of an earlier hearing, we saw the exact reason that financial privacy is so important. They went and pulled Tor's wallet to see how he had been paid.
I had this cracked me up, man, because they did. So I think we were one of the first law firms in the world to take Bitcoin as payment, like in January 2013. I never, I bothered to fact check that, right? And we were trying to raise money for a case in 2013, and somebody was like, you take Bitcoin. I was like, what's Bitcoin? They were like, it's money. And I'm like, yeah, I take it, right? And so I just like, I never thought Bitcoin was a big freaking deal, right? I was just like, what's money? I can exchange it for goods and services. And then, around 2016, 2017, regulatory agencies start going crazy. But so I hadn't thought about this stuff. I just kept the same address, like this Coinbase address I got for like all the Bitcoin payments over the years and everything like that and whatever. And then the government goes in this hearing and just goes, well, Mr. Ekeland has gotten somehow $1.2 million on this case. And I was like, I've gotten $1.2 million on this case? I'm like, this is great. Let me go check my address. I'm doing great, right? Because right now we can't afford fucking coffee, right? And it turns out they just looked at my address and everything I'd gotten over the last like decade, and they hadn't bothered to think it through. And that's really what happened here is they went down this rabbit hole. And, you know, with their confirmation bias and their need to get a conviction and close this case, and they just didn't really think it through or ever find that corroborating piece of evidence that they thought was always around the corner. You know, he was in Miami in 2017, and they put him under wiretap surveillance, IP, you know, everything, like nothing, right? Like, you cannot point. I challenge anybody listening to this. Reach out to me if you see a single piece of corroborating evidence in this case that doesn't require you to speculate in some way. And it's, I compared a little bit if you've ever broken up with somebody and you're kind of going down the rabbit hole. I would never do this, you know, looking at who they like and who's liking them, and you kind of go down this like tailspin, right? That's what the government did here. They went down the internet rabbit hole, and they were too invested after a decade to admit that they just got it wrong.
Well, and when they couldn't find anything, they made it up. We had a huge issue with the IP overlap analysis and the evidence that they brought in through FBI investigator Mazarin. And she had to retract testimony in the trial because we caught her in a straight up lie. Basically, they went through all of Roman's devices, and they couldn't find anything on Bitcoin Fog. And so they started to look for anything that they could find. They had to find something, right? And so they find this text message, right? And the text message says something along the lines of, what don't you like about me? My beard makes me look like a terrorist, or my bank account makes me look like a money launderer. I think what happened is they just filtered for the word money launder, and that's all that they could find. They ended up attributing that text message in court, in front of the jury, to Roman, and that came up, and we're like, where'd that come from? We didn't see that anywhere in the evidence. So I'm sitting there at the table, and I look over to my shoulder. I'm like, Jeff, like, you got to help me figure out where this came from. And Jeff goes to work, and sure enough, he gets it. It had come from an ebook that was on one of Roman's ebook devices. It had a Books file, and the statement was just an image that was in the book. It was an e-dating book, like how to talk to women online via text and stuff. And it was one of the text messages that was included in the ebook. They had cropped it out. It was low resolution, and they had blasted it up big, and they had attributed it to them just completely fraudulently.
I think you're being kind, and I testify to this. I don't think it came up in a search at all, because it was a low resolution image. It was just an image, and it was an old ebook format, well out of date. None of the forensic software that they were using that we were aware of was even capable of finding text inside of an image. I think they literally stumbled upon this image and said, let's use that. I mean, it was cut, it was cropped, and it looked good in front of a jury, and it was absurd. And not only that, but first time in my career, it actually required the agent to get back on the stand and deny something she had already testified to, that she found it.
She'd apologize for it.
Yeah, she'd apologize.
Mind you, this is the agent who conducted the IP overlap analysis, which was the government's key piece of evidence linking Roman to some of those accounts that we discussed earlier that were in those middle blockchain transactions between the DNS registration and Roman's KYC accounts. Because it looks like at some point in time, those email addresses related to those blockchain wallets logged into the same IP address that Roman had logged into within a certain temporal proximity, which was like hours or days. And that turned out to be a VPN service that thousands or hundreds of thousands of people could have been using at the same time.
Yeah, this is a really disturbing technical part of this case is they made attributions of control over email addresses, right? So Roman's got an email address. We know it's his address. Nobody's denying it's his address, right? And then there's this email address called shorman@hotmail.com that they say, the government says, is the one that set up these Bitcoin Fog talk accounts and all this stuff like that, right? That, you know, they're linking to Bitcoin Fog. They say because what Mazars did, the woman who made a misrepresentation about this message talking about money laundering, Mazars said, well, Roman logged into this IP address at this time. Shoremint was at the same IP address, you know, a few minutes, hours, days later. Therefore, they're the same person. So what they're saying is, now you're on a server with thousands, maybe millions of people all sharing the same IP address. And they're saying, okay, it's this one person, right? That's their link to Roman operating Bitcoin Fog for 10 years. And mind you, this is an IP address overlap analysis, they call it, dealing with stuff in Sweden in 2011. That's it.
But that goes
Right?
back to how sorry, go ahead.
No. Oh, well, let me say one more thing about, so when I asked her, is this scientific? She's like, no. I was like, how many times have you used this methodology before? She goes, I made it up for this case. And then I'm like, so you're not definitively attributing, you know, Roman as the operator of Bitcoin Fog? She says no. But the psychological effect of this kind of forensic evidence, they don't actually need to say Roman definitively did it. They're just be like, oh, our science points to it, even though it's not science. Sorry, Jeff.
Well, actually, I'll finish up that thought. I mean, on that, even though I didn't know at the time I wasn't supposed to talk to the jury, jury after it was all over, actually used the term preponderance of evidence. In other words, that was that was what they were anchoring onto, was this idea that, well, even if they couldn't prove it was him, they had so many different things that maybe could have proven they didn't come all the way. So we'll take, you know, if we can't get a perfect 10 on all of our evidence, we'll take all of the 2s and we'll add them up together until they equal 10. And so they discussed with me preponderance of evidence. What I was going to say is one of these big challenges again came up in what Tor was talking about, which was the VPN. And Mike mentioned it before, that we realized pretty quickly just looking at the jurors that they didn't know what the letters stood for. Most of them hadn't used one. And so while I was on the stand, Tor had to ask me about VPNs, if I use one, and what they're used for. And it was as though the presumption of the jury, of the government to the jury, was that you don't use a VPN unless you're hiding something, unless you're doing something wrong. Where I had to testify about everybody in the room should have been using one.
But that's the standard practice, though, isn't it? I mean, I remember I was a defendant in a lawsuit, and you know, I'm dealing with my lawyers, and they're like, "Oh, did you use, you know, Signal, or did you use private communication?" Because the court, they told me the court looks at that and just assumes that you're guilty. That's just kind of a standard practice now, which is also absurd. I mean, what happened to the Fourth Amendment? Again, when did we go from we have privacy as a right to all of a sudden we're assumed guilty for trying to protect our own privacy, which is again, as in Roman Sterlingov's case, you know, he wanted privacy because he was worried about wrench attacks, which if you see what's going on around the world right now, wrench attacks
all over the place.
All over the place. This is a serious problem. This isn't about concealing things from the government. This is about protecting yourself from being kidnapped, tortured, or murdered. The stakes here are incredibly high.
Wasn't somebody in New York kidnapped during our trial and held for his Bitcoin?
I think so. Yeah. But like, here's something else I do want to point out here is like, and this is something I tell to a lot of the clients now. I said, like, if you want to, because this goes back to Aaron, what you were saying earlier about how, you know, everyone's got this sort of image of law enforcement and the government like you learned in school. And I had it before I started doing this. And now I don't. And a lot of our clients, after they've been arrested, they're like, what the heck is going on? I thought this was a fair system. I thought it was a rational system. And I just said, listen, the quicker you get used to the fact that this is an unfair and irrational system, it's going to be easier for you. And if you want to predict the government's behavior to a higher degree of accuracy, start to view them as a criminal gang and ask yourself, in any given situation, how would a criminal gang act? And you will usually get the right kind of answer. Now, look at what they do in cases like this. They take your money right away so you can't afford a lawyer, right? The civil asset forfeiture is a huge problem where they can just go in, take all your money before there's any adjudicatory hearing at all. And how are you going to defend yourself particularly in federal court, which is very expensive, right? Like, and it's expensive for us to get our law licenses, all these costs and all these hidden costs, right? Like that, if they're jacking your money right away and they know this, but they're coming in and they're calling themselves the Department of Justice, which if you don't think the Department of Justice is an Orwellian name, I'm going to ask you, well, think twice about that, right? Because it's straight out of Orwell. The Department of Justice is just like the Ministry of Truth.
Well, we can see now today, I mean, especially today, we can see the Department of Justice is a political organization. It changes its priorities depending on who's in power. So who they were under the prior administration, who they were going after is entirely different than who they're pardoning under the current administration and not going after.
I'll second Jeff on that. I've been doing this long enough now to see that when administrations shift, who gets prosecuted shifts. Like Dan Mackey, if you know him, he was like a MAGA meme guy who
Doug Mackey.
Doug Mackey. Yeah, Doug Mackey. Sorry, Doug Mackey. Yeah, gets arrested right after Biden's inauguration, even though the conviction gets vacated. But what he'd done was like meme in the 2016 election, right, against Hillary. So they had to wait for Biden to come and arrest him. But like both sides do it. It's not, and it's an argument for you really need to limit DOJ to just strictly necessary stuff. Federal criminal jurisdiction, which is, in my opinion, not an enumerated power in the United States Constitution, needs to be severely limited because under the New Deal, it just expanded so far and expansively that they're just throwing in people in jail for political reasons. Like there's no reason to have this massive general federal police state. It's out of control.
If you really think about it, outside of biblical definitions, justice is defined by law, so it shouldn't really change depending on who's in power. It should be justice. Should be justice. It shouldn't be a matter of opinion.
And agreed. And here, what law really are we talking about, right? Like the money laundering stuff. It's just so elastic, this theory of liability, and because they. This is a little technical legal history, right? But so in the 20th century, in the New Deal, they sort of modify a lot of old laws that had restraints in them under the common law. And they pass these new federal criminal laws that basically allow them to take these really expansive interpretations and basically criminalize almost anything. And if you think like, the one thing you hear all the time is, well, I haven't done anything wrong. And you know what I say to that now? I say, it doesn't matter. If you think you haven't done anything wrong, what matters is if a fucking prosecutor thinks that you've done something wrong, because then you could be the most innocent babe and virgin in the world. And it doesn't matter. You're going to get prosecuted and you're probably going to end up in some, gulag after you've been sentenced for something you're like, but I never did it. And you're going to be saying that the entire time.
But I don't think it's even that the prosecutors believe it, because I'm looking at the same prosecutors right now in Manhattan who were on the job under a prior administration who are letting people go for things that they prosecuted 2 years ago. And now they're not prosecuting. And I'm literally seeing them sitting on their desks. And then there are people that they're prosecuting today that a couple of years ago they wouldn't have bothered to prosecute. So it doesn't. You were saying, Tor, about compared to a criminal gang. How about the math in this case? When you add up the damages, how you guys have the math better than me. Give them the math on this, on the damages, the double billing.
I can't even get it straight, right? Like I don't because they said they like the double counting. The valuation of what they say the criminal funds are. They have a forfeiture order for $400 million. They say, what was it, Mike? 70, 80 million of it is criminal. I don't understand it. I can't.
And then they want him to be, even though they say that they can follow money leaving Bitcoin fog going to be used for criminal purposes. And then some of those criminal purposes they've already shut down and reclaimed because they say we know this is criminal. We shut down this site and they reclaimed it, but yet they're making Roman responsible for money they've already seized on the output.
Yeah. All that money in Silk Road that they showed in trial has been seized, and then now they're attributing it to be part of the forfeiture for Roman. It's just astronomical. He's never, if that sticks with him for life, he's never going to be able to pay it off. It's crazy.
So the total is what, 395 million?
So like that,
495
398,
million,
something like that. He's close to
like that.
400, 200. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
if Roman actually ran Bitcoin Fog, if he had actually run Bitcoin Fog, the vast majority of that has already transferred out of his funds.
And it's in government wallets.
Right.
Yeah, it's a government wallet.
Yeah, now in government wallets, but they want him to pay that full amount.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So I want everybody to understand. So the deck is stacked. You're going to lose 90 to 99% of the time on this. In the case of, in this case, the evidence that was presented, their expert witness was torched on the other side. And we have everything else that's just been described here in terms of the discovery and, taking ebook things that say money laundering and trying to turn, baffle the jury with bullshit as I describe it. But one of the other challenges in any of these federal court cases is the cost of the case. And I've listened to you guys talk about this case for a long time, and I've been watching other interviews. I mean, this almost broke you, right? It's something. This case. Do you want to talk about this case and then, but in general, also kind of generalize it to what it means to have to mount a defense against the federal government?
For a large portion of this case, we couldn't pay our rent. We're trying to negotiate with our landlords to try to push it through because we were spending all of our time working on this stuff, and the government had seized all of Roman's funds. He had no money to pay us. We were complaining about this on Twitter, talking about that, and you know what? The Bitcoin community stood up and
came
to bat.
to the Bitcoin
They came
community.
to bat. We got to give a big shout out to Lucas Betchart from the Swiss Bitcoin Association, who gave us a call and said, "Hey, this is really, really messed up what's happening in Rome, and we want to try to support you. Let me try to put together a couple of presentation opportunities for you in Europe, because if that's happening to a fellow European, we want to help out." And so we ended up doing a little tour. We spoke in Zurich, Munich, Stuttgart, Berlin, and we got to know the European Bitcoin community, and just filled with great people. And they gave us enough funds to be able to take this through.
Yeah, like without the community, we would never survived. Like we took this, we were obviously hoping we get paid. Like everyone wants to pay their rent, right? But like we were committed to this case because we think it's really important. There's a lot of things we look for in cases like this. This is a matter of first impression. It's unique. It's never happened before. We can't let the government, advance these kinds of theories without a challenge. But without the community, we would have never survived. So thank you to the community on that, because the community really stepped up.
100%.
That's incredible. So what is the average cost, or kind of out of the gates, if you're going to fight a
couple million? Like you can do them. I mean, we did our first one on the fly. I don't want people to, like, if somebody's like in this despairing spot right now, to have that sink them. Like you can, our first case we did with like nothing, and we eventually won it on appeal, but that was like brutal. But if you're going to have like, do the case properly, it's probably 1.52 as a baseline. And then if you need experts, cases like this, it gets really, really expensive. And that's another problem. You've got, an $8.6 billion market cap corporation like Chainalysis, and you're trying to challenge them, and you don't have any money to get experts because the government seized all the money and stuff like that.
CipherTrace was going to be working for us for free. CipherTrace was like volunteering their services for us before they got pulled, and we were really grateful for that. They were doing it.
I got my flight reimbursed at my stopover on my way to Washington, D.C. the first time.
Yeah.
That's how thin they were. Tor just kept saying, "Don't worry, I'm just waiting for a check to clear. Don't worry."
We took other money we were making on other cases and putting it in this one. This was like, we're not complaining. We're thankful to everybody who helped out, right? Like we knew what we were getting into. But like that's been an important core value of the firm and how we started, is these big computer cases, and we're not going to stop doing them. We're going to be a lot more selective, because you can't do a bunch of them because you got to pay the rent, right? You got to take care of your other clients, but we're not going to stop doing these cases, and no matter how much the other side wants to stop us. This,
by the way, even though I don't like to to quote unquote fall in love with a client early because I want to make sure if he did something, I can tell his attorneys he did something. But one of the early signals to me that it was very unlikely that Roman was Akamashite Omodetu, the guy who ran Bitcoin Fog, was pretty simple. That they were running on a shoestring. They're calling me up. I can't bill anything because they don't have anything to pay. We're searching for everybody else we can get to possibly be a part of the case, and my thinking on it is, when you talk about $2 million, let's just take $2 million relative to what they think he had. It's a drop in the bucket. Wouldn't he have just pulled it out? I mean, why not? If everything's, I've had plenty of people, and specifically in cryptocurrency, who said, listen, I'll empty out my wallet. Better than going to jail.
Yep.
Made no sense. So instead, apparently, he decided to take a risk on spending most of the rest of his life in jail so that when he gets out, he might still have the Bitcoin wallet money. A guy who repeatedly in conversations that they translated is talking about how worried he is that Bitcoin's going to crash. Wants to spend decades in jail and hope that it's going to be worth something.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. So what percentage of cases never go forward because people can't afford the legal fees? What percentage?
It's why I think one of the main reasons you've got a 90% plea bargain rate in federal courts. Most of them. And
I think isn't it like it's 80% plus that just don't ever see any litigation?
It's 90% plus, depending on the year. It's that bad, and that has a whole other thing where what you think the law is really isn't, because most cases are getting disposed of in the sort of plea realm where it's all the laws wishy-washy and people are cutting deals, and what's actually happening in the courts and what people think is happening in the courts are totally divorced from each other,
The other thing your viewers should probably recognize, and this is certainly not good for my business and maybe not good for yours, but they should know, one of the recent tactics of the DOJ is that if you want to have any chance at any sort of a deal, which is really your only chance, I mean, statistically, your odds are so far against you. If you don't take a deal, you're probably going to jail. But what they've done now is, just so you know, the deal won't exist if you spend our time looking at the evidence. So I've been told to my face, I will testify to this, to my face, I was told, if you are going to ask for this evidence, the deals are all off the table. So the defendant says he didn't do it, he wants to see his evidence, but he can't, but he'll lose any chance of a deal if he looks at his evidence.
And I think what's really problematic in that is that, look at where that's coming from. That's not coming from a position of, well, we're concerned about justice and we want to make sure that we've gotten the right person. So please examine all the evidence as close as you can. And please point out any mistakes to us because we don't want to convict any innocent person. What they're saying is, we want a conviction. Doesn't matter what you think. Okay, well, I mean, and that's, whatever, that's the reality, but that's not how it should be. And I think maybe there needs to be some ethical changes in our business when it comes to prosecutors, because I think that's in part product of the fact that we're told, trained as lawyers, you have to have zealous representation of your client no matter what. But I think that axiom is very problematic when it comes to prosecutors, because that means they're just going to go and try to convict an innocent person no matter what, which is what we see happen all the time.
Yeah. By the way, you mentioned, still, we keep harping on this, being like a criminal gang. But in my most recent Manhattan case, we have a judge who recommended to the prosecutor that she needed more help. The prosecutor that comes in to give her help is the prosecutor who actually helped the judge get appointed, and who the judge helped get his job at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And they golf together and acknowledge that they do breakfast together. But we have been told that, at least in Manhattan, the chances of getting either one of them taken off the case are so low that it's not worth upsetting them by making an issue out of it. But they're friends. They're buddies.
There was a moment in this case. There was a moment in Roman's case during trial or jury selection where we had to use a strike to knock the judge's former law partner off the potential jury list. Apparently, we couldn't use in that courtroom a 4-cause strike. We had to use one of the limited strikes that we had to knock off this conflict of interest. And we can see this over and over and over and over again. At one point, they were threatening to throw Tor and I in jail for talking about this. Remember that, Tor?
Yeah. Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, we just the prosecutors in this case did press for years, and they were leaking to Andy Glimberg and Wired for his book Tracers in the Dark. Like we've had cases written about in books before, but I've never had a case that I read about in a book before it went to trial, and so we had to respond to all this press the government had been doing for years, and they just didn't. It was just by pure coincidence that I know Andy, and Andy had called me for comment on another case. And I was like, Andy, what the fuck is up with this stuff you're writing about in Wired about, I picked up one of these clients. And there's this case is like a movie, a really, really dark movie when I go back and I look at everything. But so, yeah, they tried to gag us because we started responding into the press to the stuff that they'd said about our client. Because everybody pretends like the press doesn't matter, and it totally matters. Totally matters.
Well, it completely matters. Isn't it also true, Mike? Did you tell me something about the judge and then judges owning private prisons? And
that was crazy. So this jail that they had been keeping Roman in pretrial, he's accused of a federal crime. He should be in a federal jail pre-trial, but that's not how it usually works, and that's not how it happened.
Because they can't operate. The Fed government can't operate proper facilities. That's why he's in a state jail, because the federal government is incompetent.
So they got these contracts with the state level facilities, and the state level facility he was at was the Northern Neck Regional Jail. It's the same jail. I think it was Paul Manafort was down there, and Michael Vick served his time in there. But the Northern Neck Regional Jail, according to people who have told me about this, is owned by 2 judges in that county, and the jail was just filled to the brim with people from that county because you get in trouble for some small tiny infraction and the judge throws you into this jail where they're getting a cut from the state for operating and owning it. So we just saw this kind of corruption between private interests in the justice system over and over and over again throughout this entire case.
Which, if you follow the money, that is where this all goes.
Well, wasn't there also some issue where apparently Roman was in prison at a time where whoever was actually involved with Bitcoin Fog was doing something that might prove that it could be?
Oh, that boiled my blood. Towards the end of the trial, there was an FBI agent who came in, and he was saying that there was. Well, no, we were looking at the domain registration for the DNS because that was their key piece of evidence, and it looked like during the time period of trial, Roman had been locked up the entire time during the trial, and I think it was the real operator of Bitcoin Fog waving hello and saying, "Hey, I'm still out here. This guy's innocent." I think he was trying to give us a layup, but we weren't allowed to introduce that evidence at trial that there was a change to the DNS registration for BitcoinFog.com, which Roman has supposedly been operating the entire time he was in jail. And when we brought this up with the prosecution, they said, "Oh, well, he must have been able to find some computer access in the federal prison." We're like, "What? He didn't even have core links." But Jeff found this one. Jeff is the one who brought it out, so I'll let him talk to it on the technical side.
No, it was just. We were grasping at anything, but the fact of the matter was, I was watching anything that had anything to do with Bitcoin Fog, because we had reason. I think from the beginning, Mike and Tor both told me that they had some sense that it was possible that somebody was still out there just kind of laying low, and so we watched it, we monitored it, we saw changes in the DNS, we saw websites that were actually using known wallet addresses for Bitcoin Fog. None of it made sense for Roman to be doing from behind bars. It wasn't going to help. Or if he was going to do it, then he should have put up Tor's address so he could at least get better funding going into his defense.
When we look at everything from a realistic perspective, what I think happened here was when Roman was going around to those early conferences and meetups back in 2010, 2011, and he was the person that others would go to get into Bitcoin Fog. I think the pseudonymous Akamasheti Omadetu, the person behind Bitcoin Fog, I think they used Roman as a clean source of funds because these people have very comprehensive understanding of how blockchain tracing works and the risk that some kind of company like Chainalysis could be born in the future to do this kind of tracing. They were ahead of their time, the people who did set up Bitcoin Fog. And I think that they set Roman up as a patsy, knowing that he could be a clean source of funds so that any kind of future tracing wouldn't tie back to them. I think that's the most real situation, how it really went down here.
We should probably mention the fact that, you know, in order to make this again more circumstantial evidence, they brought in 2 witnesses from prison to basically testify about how bad this is, and I guess one of them I think had actually communicated with Roman at some point.
No, it had never communicated.
No, neither of them.
It was Ilya Lichtenstein who did the Bitfinex hack, and then Harmon. What was Harmon's first name? I forget.
Larry Dean Harmon from
Larry Dean Harmon, who ran a mixer. But they brought it, like, Ilya Lichtenstein's like Russian looking. They're trying to bring him in to guilt by association. None of them communicated with Roman. None of them had any testimony about him operating it. But like, let's bring in these criminals who've used Bitcoin Fog a couple times, and I mean, again, that's their whole case.
And
Ilya Lichtenstein has since been released from prison.
You would think after a 10-year investigation, they would at least have one piece of direct evidence, right?
Well,
like, and here's the other thing we haven't even talked about is why are we in Washington, D.C. when this is all happening in Sweden and Europe, and the only thing that happens in D.C. is an IRS criminal investigator sends some Bitcoin through Bitcoin Fog that is not the proceeds of a crime, so it can't be money laundering, and they send a message to Bitcoin Fog help desk supposedly saying, oh, I want a money launder, and you can turn something into money laundering if the government agent says, okay, this is drug money, I want a money launder, but it gets no response. So there's no evidence of the record that anybody ever saw it. That's the only thing tying anything to DC, which one of our main contentions on appeal is that's not constitutional because the United States Constitution requires all crimes to be tried in the state and the district where they occurred, and no crime occurred in DC.
Well, wait, Tor, wasn't there one more? Wasn't one of his charges that he was operating a business in DC or taking
unlicensed money transmission business? But like, what? Like, you're doing business in DC, but there's no customers? If this is what we said in our appeal, is that if he was operating a business in DC, how come there's no evidence of any customers in DC? Because there is the only there's not a single user in DC except the FBI, and they got no response, and it wasn't illegal. No, the IRS, but it wasn't illegal, right? And what's scary about this, if you think about it, it means that any prosecutor in the United States can access a website anywhere in the world, send a message saying they want to commit a crime. The website owner never sees it, doesn't know about it, right? And then they're flying in the US and they get arrested, and then they're put on trial in Milwaukee or wherever, right? Like, you can't, from a technical computer law viewpoint, this is another reason we think this case is so important. You cannot turn venue in criminal cases on the unilateral act of government agents. If there's no evidence that the defendant knew about this criminal act, then how can you say they've got what's called the mens rea, guilty state of mind, like criminal intent? And here, just by allowing the government to enter in on their laptop or whatever, send a message that nobody ever hears, they're saying that he's guilty of money laundering. But then you've removed about 2,000 years of our criminal law that says you have to have criminal intent in your head, right? They've turned money laundering on the internet into a strict liability crime. Yes, that's a little technical, but you should all be worried as fuck about that, because that means anybody anywhere in the world that's operating a website could get yanked into federal court just because some prosecutor sends you a message that you've never seen.
It just keeps getting worse and worse.
No, dude, it's a nightmare, dude. I can be here.
It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible.
And keep in mind, because we haven't actually just said this out loud, but if Chainalysis worked, if it actually worked, why was there not a single witness that they could have come up with that can say, this is, I communicated with Roman Sterlingov to help to, launder my money.
Right.
The only one that they could manage to get a hold of was a guy who literally used his own real name and whatever his country's version of a social security number was. I mean,
but still no evidence anybody ever communicated with. I mean, it's crazy.
Right.
One of the hard things about this case is that after 10 years, they really didn't have any evidence. So what little weird threads they would pull out, like from his notes, where they're like, oh, he's talking about like layering and money laundering, right? Like it kind of gets magnified a little bit because there's nothing else there. They had this like note where he's talking about 2011, how to exchange Bitcoin into cash. And it's in like 40 pages of notes. Nowhere mentions Bitcoin fog or anything. And they're like, this is him talking about doing the layering transaction to buy the DNS registration, completely legal act in 2011 to the Bitcoin fog, website. And to go back to an earlier point, even the judge said that a Bitcoin mixer is legal. He didn't get convicted for running a Bitcoin mixer. He got convicted for money laundering through that mixer, essentially turning a blind eye to all these, Silk Road and everything, which is what current DOJ says isn't a crime. But when you ask current DOJ to drop this prosecution and just everybody, Kianal, everybody, Sammer, they won't, even though they wrote a memo saying it's not illegal and we're not going to be prosecuting this. And I think that's just because the Trump administration doesn't have control over their own DOJ. I think there's a lot of rebellion and people fighting, the new regime because they're just holding out for the next one.
Yeah, I mean, how I even got into covering a lot of this was I saw Ian Freeman and others were being targeted, and I started looking into it, and then I kind of understood. So Biden had signed an executive order 14067, which authorized the U.S. to push a CBDC and also authorized a whole of government crackdown on crypto, because if you're going to launch a CBDC, people aren't going to like it. So you basically have to get rid of the competition. So one of my arguments has been, I started out trying to warn people that this would be coming. And now we have, 8 people that were advocating for it, this enemies of the state thing. But, Trump declared the war on crypto was over, but the POWs are still there. And, I'm hopeful that this changes, because you're right. Continuing to prosecute or keep these people in prison is against current government policy and against, what Trump stated his position was on cryptocurrency.
And the government continues to be grasping at straws, even on appeal in the government's opposition brief that we're going through the last couple of weeks in preparation to write a reply, which we filed on Friday. Now we have the appellate counsel for DOJ diving into the admitted exhibits, and they bring out from deep in Roman's Reddit post, this one post where he's talking about John McAfee, and it has quotations around it in his Reddit post. And it says, this quote is from John McAfee and Roman is quoting him. And it basically, John McAfee is saying, I have 100 companies registered in 50 different countries. And the government, this time
all these trusts and bank accounts,
has taken that quote from John McAfee that Roman was citing in his Reddit post and attributed it to him, saying, Roman was having multiple trusts and companies and countries all around the world. They're just grasping at every single thing that they can because they don't have anything.
And we've all made mistakes like that. Like, that's what happens when you're like going through stuff, you're flying faster or whatever. I get it. I made mistakes like that. But the problem is you can't like try to put somebody in jail when that's how it's been going for the entire investigation, right? Like you just, there's like, again, you cannot point to a single, this is bizarre to me. You cannot point to a single piece of direct corroborating evidence for any of the speculation in this trial. Any of it. Not a single one. I've never had a case like that, ever. I don't know if I'll ever have a case like that again. I hope never to have a case like this again. But that's, there's just faith in the government and this, look at this new exotic blockchain tracing, this fancy company, Chainalysis. They must be right because they're financially successful, right? And, if they're so right, show us all the stuff. Oh, no. Then the criminals are going to get it. No, I think what you're really afraid of is that if we really looked closely at it and you let us really look at it, we'd find out all the problems in it. And then your business model would go down. right? And it's really, again, it's a question of like, do you subjugate the interests of justice to the interests of business? And to me, the answer to that question is a very clear no.
Yep. Well, I mean, I think the fact that my understanding is they're using the precedent in this case, Chainalysis, is the justification for why it works. So it's kind of it's this circular logic, and now they're expanding their use of Chainalysis. And you know, to me, this is part of, again, I'm looking at this as kind of what was the DOJ strategy. I think this is part of the strategy to kill Bitcoin and kill cryptocurrencies. Which is why these things are, why this case and cases like it were selected, and because the implications if this case is successful and the appeal it's not overturned are damaging for the entire space.
This is the most important case in the Bitcoin industry.
One of them. I mean, I think there's more, but definitely one of them. You know, with you know, Keno and what those guys are. Well, everybody's gone through. You know, all the prisoners in the war are Bitcoin.
Also, it's important to. Oh, sorry. I'm just gonna say it's important to note that even people that we're not seeing as, you know, as crypto prisoners, a lot of what I'm seeing now with Chainalysis is where the crypto is not the nexus of their case, but it is what gets them the warrant to come in and do a search and make a bigger case. And so now I'm just getting a ton of cases where the warrant's based on the use of crypto, and the idea that probable cause says if you used crypto, you must have been committing a crime. No kidding. Like, that's their probable cause. We came in, we served a warrant, and that warrant was based on the fact that if you weren't doing something wrong, why'd you use Bitcoin?
Wow.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that is a bad part. So what is the status right now of this case? Let's talk about what's going on, you know, in May.
We got oral arguments in front of the DC Federal Court of Appeals on May 12th at 9:30 in the morning. We're not sure if we're going first. There's two other cases being heard. The oral arguments will be 10 to 20 minutes each side. Then
we did get our judges. We did get our judges. It's Patricia A. Millett, Cornelia T.L. Pollard, and Robert L. Wilkins are our judges.
And I think they're all Obama appointees, and I don't know which way that cuts, and hopefully it won't cut
hard
anyway.
to know.
It's impossible to know. I think, but I mean, they're all really accomplished judges. That's one thing. Like, they're not. This is the major leagues, and you're not. These are very, very smart, accomplished judges. And for those of you, people may know this, but like the DC Federal Court of Appeals is a big feeder court for Supreme Court justices. So we're going to argue it down there. We're going to have probably like some kind of reception or something like that afterwards. If people want to hang out, they can just email us at rsvp@torekeland.com if you guys want to come. We ask if anybody goes to the Court of Appeals that they just, business casual, be respectful of the court. We're trying to fill the courtroom with respectful people. It's not helpful if we've got people like standing up and yelling, free Roman in the oral arguments, but it makes a huge difference on this firm's first big case when we had oral arguments, which we ended up winning on this case on a similar issue. The courtroom was packed, right? And the arguments happened. And then after our case argues, like, the courtroom empties. And one of the Third Circuit judges is like, well, we have other cases too that are just as good. But that, just having people there showing the support, I think helps. It makes a big difference because it helps the judges really visualize that this is actually a really important thing to the community. So, we'll have information up on our website, how to get there. DC Court of Appeals, May 12th, 9:30 in the morning. The Federal Court of Appeals, not the DC, municipal one. Please come out. And if you want to go to whatever reception we're having, just email us at rsvp@torekeland.com.
Great. I assume you can't, talk about what you're going to say in advance. It's probably not a good idea, but
a little bit. But like, it's obvious from our brief. There was no crime in DC. It should have been tried in DC. They should have let us look at everything. They shouldn't have brought up this evidence of child pornography, which he had nothing to do with, and there's no images. Like they said, because some like less than $900, right, $1,000 of funds after going out of Bitcoin Fog went to this North Korean child porn site. They're saying Roman's basically a child pornographer. It's like, what does that have to do with him operating or anything, right? And what are the other things that they miscalculated the valuation of the funds, and they gave this willful blindness instruction, which is really messed up because it's not in the statute, it's not in the law, and normally you have to have criminal intent, right? But they got this judicially created jury instruction that says, well, even if you think he didn't know about it, if you think that he should have known about it because he was kind of looking the other way, you can find him guilty, which we're just like, what? Like if Congress had wanted that to be the standard, they should have put it in the law. So we're appealing on that basis. But
we got the statute of limitations argument too, because all the these darknet markets that were seized by the government well outside the statute of limitations was allowed in to taint the jury.
This case is crazy. I've never had a case like this. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, this is the worst one I've heard so far. Actually, this is just insane. And when I heard Mike talk about it recently, I'm like, wow, this is. I mean, all of these cases are bad, but this one is definitely next level. Was there anything that I've not questioned you guys on, or are there any other major points that you want to get across about this case?
I think you covered a lot. I mean, you could go on. I mean, you could just do a huge mini-series on this case, but I think I think you've done a really good job on covering the main points.
I mean, if you guys want to learn more about it, there's a website, freeroman.org, that some of Roman's friends back in Scandinavia are running, and that has a lot of information about the case, about Roman himself. Who I got him on my T-shirt here with the laser eyes. And freeroman.org has all the information, as well as some donation addresses, whether you want to donate with Lightning or with Bitcoin or Monero. It's all available on there.
Also, I think the rage.co.co is going to be publishing something that Roman had written.
Yes, Roman has written a blog post. It'll be the first time that Roman's putting in writing his own experience of what's happened, and it'll be published in the rage.co.
Great. Do you know when that's going to be? Or...
Should be.
I was talking to the publisher, and it should be within the week.
Excellent. And you guys are going to be at the Bitcoin conference as well as the Enemies of the State, correct?
Yes, we'll be there.
Yes.
And Tor's going to be on
I
a
think
panel with the Bitcoin conference.
On the Monday of the Vegas 2026 thing, I'm on a panel with Sasha Hoder and who is it? Ryan.
Zach Shapiro.
Zach Shapiro. Sorry, God, Ryan. Don't kill me, Zach, when I see you, please, brother. But yeah.
Great. Well, I mean, you guys have been doing a heroic work. I mean, I know you've been traveling all over the world and you've put everything into this. And so, I thank you. We should all thank you. And I guess just again to recap, why is this important to everyone? What are the implications? Like if we're giving people like the bullet point list, if this case stands, what does that mean for everyone?
Well, number one, it means that if you've ever done a Bitcoin transaction, they might just throw you in jail just on faulty tracing. And it's not going to matter whether or not you're innocent. It stands for the proposition that they can prosecute and find somebody guilty in a case like this without a single piece of direct evidence and entirely on speculative forensic evidence that has no scientific foundation, and purely on the basis of the fact that law enforcement uses it. It means that any federal prosecutor anywhere can send a message to your website anywhere in the world saying that, oh, hey, I want to use your website to commit a crime. You never see it. And then you can get arrested for engaging in that crime, even though it's something you never, ever knew about. It also stands for the possibility that if you create something legal like a Bitcoin mixer, which even the judge in this case said was completely legal, and people use it for legal things and you don't know about it, that you can be held liable in a way that banks are not held liable for the exact same behavior.
Absolutely terrifying. All right. Well, so if you're watching this, please like and share not only this post. I'll put all the links that were discussed in the show notes, and also I will be putting out a lot of clips, just both image posts and video clips related to this episode right away, starting right after. This will air on Thursday, and then the clips will drip out from there. But I encourage everyone to spread the word and support as quickly as possible, because this hearing date is May the 12th at 9:30 a.m. And so we want to do everything that we can to elevate this and help out in any way we can. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank
you,
you.
Aaron.
Yeah.
Let's free Roman.
Play Roman.
They raised a throne of glass and wire, a kingdom born of cold desire, and crowned the silent code that came to rule ya. It watched the trembling of your breath, it priced your life, it mapped your death, a final betrayal dressed as something true. Bless the unbroken will, bless the unbroken will. They promised order, promised peace, but every gift required a piece of who you were before their grid consumed you. A nation bartered for control, a ledger carved into your soul, a quiet doom disguised as forward future. Bless the unbroken will, bless the unbroken will.
Oh, the watchers rise in the circuitry. Oh, the warnings lost in the dawn. Oh, the people bow to the ministry till every name was gone.
I walked the halls where truth was sold, where human hands grew numb and cold, and efficiency became the faith they gave you. You'd never see the chains they built, but every sunrise dripped with guilt, a quiet empire shaping your behavior. Bless the unbroken will, bless the unbroken will. They tokenize the land and sky,
Tokenize the land and sky.
the right to live, the right to die,
The right to live, the right to die.
a sovereign life reduced to captured measure. The future shrank to narrow lines, a cage of data, coded signs, a subtle death they dressed in borrowed pleasure.
Bless the unbroken will.
Rise though the night is closing in, rise though the stars are dimmed and still, rise though the crown is forged of sin. Bless the unbroken will. So keep your lantern in the storm, guard every soul that still feels warm, and hold the truth no tyrant's code can alter. For even at the world's last hour, a single heart can break their tower, a whispered vow the darkness can